They found the campsite empty at first. The tents were still zipped. The fire pit was warm. The backpacks sat upright, as if their owners had simply stood up and walked away. But the swamp had already closed over them. No blood, no signs of struggle, just 6 footprints leading into the water and none coming back out. Florida swamps don't announce themselves as killers. They don't look dramatic or monstrous. They wait in silence, sweating under the sun, breathing through layers of mud and water and rot. To outsiders, they seem slow, peaceful even. But locals know better. The swamp does not rush, it absorbs. The area where the campers vanished didn't have a name on most maps. It sat beyond the marked trails, past the warning signs most people ignored. Cypress knees jutted from black water like broken teeth. The air was thick enough to drink. Insects screamed constantly, not as noise, but as pressure. Even seasoned hikers felt watched there, not by animals, but by the land itself. The campers were not reckless teenagers. They were experienced, prepared. 2 couples and 2 brothers, all in their 20s, all familiar with wilderness survival. They planned a 3-day trip, lightweight gear, GPS, emergency radios, someone who knew exactly when they'd return. They never did. Search teams arrived 48 hours later. They followed the trail easily at first. Boot prints, broken reeds, drag marks where gear had been pulled instead of carried. But the ground softened with every step. Solid earth dissolved into sponge. Dry land became suggestion. The swamp did not swallow things violently. It accepted them. At the campsite, everything was wrong. Phones sat on a log, powered off. A pot of water rested over embers that should have been cold. One tent flop was unzipped halfway, as if someone had frozen mid-motion. There were no signs of animals, no overturned supplies, no blood. The swamp hadn't taken them in panic. It had taken them patiently. A ranger noticed the smell first. Not decay, not death, but disturbance. Fresh mud, churned water, something recently displaced and then carefully erased. He followed the footprints until they reached the edge of a shallow pool that looked no different from the rest of the swamp. The water was black. Not dark, black. It reflected nothing. 6 sets of footprints ended there. Divers refused to enter, not because of alligators, not because of snakes, but because the bottom didn't feel like bottom. Poles sank too easily. Probes vanished into nothing. The swamp floor wasn't solid. It was layered, floating, deceptive, a false surface hiding a deeper hunger beneath. Locals whispered about that place after sunset, about how the swamp there didn't just drown people, it held them. Bodies didn't surface, bones weren't found. The swamp didn't give evidence, it erased. By the 3rd day, search dogs stopped barking near the water's edge. They wouldn't step closer. Handlers pulled them back as the animals whined and dug their paws into the earth, desperate to retreat. Even the birds avoided that section of trees. The swamp was quiet there, unnaturally quiet. One rescuer stepped too far from the path. The mud took him to the knee instantly. Not slowly, instantly. It released him only after 3 others pulled him back, boots lost, legs scraped raw. He said the ground moved beneath him, not alive, but shifting, rearranging, deciding. That night, the search team camped miles away. No one slept. The air felt wrong, heavy, wet, the kind of heat that presses on your chest and makes breathing feel optional. One man swore he heard splashing long after dark, slow, deliberate steps in water too shallow for anything to walk through. No one investigated. By the end of the week, the search was called off. Officially, the campers were presumed drowned. Privately, everyone involved knew that was a lie. Drowning leaves traces. This left nothing. The swamp had taken them whole. And the most unsettling part wasn't the disappearance. It was the fact that the campsite looked ready for them to return, as if the swamp expected more people soon. Because in Florida, there are places where the land doesn't just kill you, it keeps you. The mistake most people make about swamps is believing they kill quickly. They imagine panic, thrashing, screaming, and sudden disappearance beneath the surface. But that isn't how this swamp works. It doesn't rush. It weakens you first. It drains heat, strength, clarity, and hope, one slow decision at a time. The campers' final day began like any other. Morning humidity wrapped around their tents before the sun had fully risen. Sweat came easily. Water did not. Their filters clogged faster than expected, the swamp water thick with organic matter that tasted faintly metallic even after purification. They joked about it, unaware that dehydration had already begun to set in. By midday, the heat became oppressive. Shade offered no relief. The air itself felt wet, heavy enough to press against the lungs. Insects swarmed without mercy, biting through clothing, into ears, nostrils, eyelids. The campers debated cutting the trip short. One of the brothers suggested a shortcut marked faintly on his GPS, a narrow route through the swamp that would save hours. That was the moment everything changed. The path didn't look dangerous. The ground appeared firm, covered in grass and leaf litter. Cypress trees stood calmly, their roots half submerged but stable. Water pooled shallowly between patches of land no deeper than a few inches. Nothing about it screamed death. The first step sank slightly. The second sank more. The ground shifted underfoot, subtle enough to ignore, elastic like soaked sponge. One camper laughed nervously, lifting his boot and watching black water fill the impression instantly. They adjusted their footing, spreading their weight, moving carefully. Then one of the women froze. Her foot wouldn't lift, not because it was stuck, but because when she tried, the ground pulled back. Not violently, firmly, like suction closing around her ankle. She tugged harder, panic flickering across her face as the mud crept higher, swallowing her boot. They rushed to help. Bad instinct, worse outcome. Every step closer weakened the surface. The false ground collapsed in slow motion. One man dropped to a knee, then his thigh, then his waist. The mud wasn't liquid. It didn't splash. It held, thick, cold, and dense. It wrapped around limbs like wet concrete. They tried lying flat, tried throwing packs aside, tried reaching for roots that snapped under pressure. The swamp floor wasn't bottomless. It was layered. Floating mats of vegetation concealed deeper pits of decomposing matter, acidic and oxygen poor, designed by nature to trap anything heavy enough to break through. The more they struggled, the faster it took them. One brother managed to crawl free, chest heaving, skin smeared black. He reached back for the others, fingers brushing fabric, skin, hair, but every pull dragged him closer to the same fate. He felt it then. The ground shifting beneath him, rearranging itself, redistributing weight, choosing. He ran. Not because he wanted to abandon them, because survival overrides morality when panic reaches a certain threshold. He screamed for help, voice cracking, feet slapping water and mud as the swamp resisted every step. His boots sank, released, sank again. The sound of suction followed him like breathing. Behind him, the screaming stopped. That silence was worse than any cry. He didn't look back. Later, he would replay that moment endlessly, wondering if one more step, one more reach, one more second could have changed anything. But the swamp doesn't allow second chances. It closes opportunities quietly, efficiently. He made it 50 yards before collapsing. Dehydration blurred his vision. Heat exhaustion rattled his thoughts. His radio crackled uselessly. Waterlogged, shorted out. His GPS blinked once, then died. He was alone, coated in mud that burned slightly against his skin, acidic and alive with bacteria. By nightfall, the swamp transformed. Temperatures dropped, but humidity remained, turning the air into cold mist that clung to skin. Sounds changed. Frogs stopped calling. Insects quieted. Something else took over. The sound of water shifting where no wind touched it. Slow movement, deliberate disturbance. He climbed onto what looked like a solid rise of land and sat shaking, hugging his knees, listening. The swamp smelled stronger at night. Rot, sulfur, sweet decay. The smell of things breaking down slowly, endlessly. At some point, exhaustion pulled him into shallow sleep. He dreamed of sinking, not falling, sinking while standing still, of mud rising past his knees, waist, chest, mouth, of trying to scream while the swamp filled his throat, gently, patiently, without urgency. He woke choking on air. Something brushed his leg. Not an animal, not movement, just water shifting around his calf, testing, touching. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He stayed frozen until dawn. When search teams later reconstructed his path, they found where he had slept. The ground there was unstable. One wrong shift, one restless movement, and the swamp would have taken him too. But it hadn't. Not because it failed, because it didn't need to hurry. The Florida swamp doesn't devour everyone at once. It spreads the fear. It leaves survivors. So the story continues. The survivor was found at dawn, barely conscious, clinging to a strip of land that shouldn't have held his weight. His skin was burned raw in places where the swamp mud had touched him. Not chemically, not violently, slowly. His lips were cracked, his eyes unfocused. He kept whispering the same sentence over and over. It moved when we stopped moving. Rescue teams didn't question him. They had heard similar things before. At the ranger station, the official report was written carefully. Exposure, dehydration, environmental hazards. The language avoided specifics, avoided implications. Florida had enough bad press without adding sentient terrain to the list. But off the record, the older rangers spoke freely. That swamp had a history. Decades earlier, before GPS and lightweight gear, a group of seasonal workers vanished in the same region. Before that, a small hunting party disappeared, their dogs found days later wandering the highway, mud-caked and feral-eyed. Before that, there were Seminole stories, not of monsters, but of bad ground, places where the land was sick, where water and earth forgot their roles and consumed without hunger or mercy. The swamp didn't drown people, it stored them. Recovery teams returned to the campsite with probes, sonar, and ground-penetrating equipment. The readings made no sense. Solid ground appeared hollow. Deep pockets showed organic matter where none should exist. Layers of vegetation floated atop decomposing peat, which itself rested on pockets of trapped gas and water. A shifting architecture, always changing, never stable. Bodies don't rise there. The chemistry prevents it. Acidic water dissolves tissue quickly. Anaerobic conditions break down bone. Gases escape through cracks too slowly to create buoyancy. The swamp digests without chewing, dissolving evidence into itself. By the time someone realizes what's happening, there is nothing left to retrieve. One diver volunteered anyway. He lasted less than 3 minutes. He reported the sensation of sinking while remaining upright, of pressure wrapping his legs unevenly, of the ground sliding sideways beneath him. He said visibility was zero, not because of darkness, but because the water was thick. When they pulled him out, his hands shook uncontrollably, and he refused to go near the water again. I felt it rearranging, he said, like it was making room. The search was terminated officially that afternoon. Unofficially, the swamp continued its work. Rain came 2 days later, heavy, unrelenting sheets that raised the waterline and erased what little trace remained of the campsite. Footprints vanished, disturbed soil smoothed itself over, broken reeds straightened, the place reset, returning to its natural state of deception. The survivor was hospitalized for weeks. Infection set into the burns on his legs. Doctors scraped away layers of damaged skin, shaking their heads at injuries that didn't behave like normal wounds. When questioned, he refused to talk about the moment the others disappeared, not because of guilt, because he didn't know how to describe it. "They didn't go under," he said once, voice barely above a whisper. "The ground went up." He never camped again. Neither did two of the rescuers. Locals avoided the area entirely, not with fear, but with resignation. Some places aren't cursed, they're just wrong. The swamp had existed long before humans mapped it, long before warning signs were posted. People wandered in, some wandered out. Others became part of the landscape, their remains redistributed through roots, water, and time. The most unsettling part came months later. A new campsite appeared. Fresh, clean, undisturbed. A fire ring rebuilt by unknown hands. Stones stocked carefully. A log dragged into place for seating. No footprints nearby. No signs of who had done it. Rangers dismantled it immediately, uneasy with the implication. The swamp had learned what lured people. It didn't need traps. It didn't need movement. It needed familiarity, comfort, safety. And somewhere beneath the still black water, beneath layers of false ground and dissolved history, the Florida swamp waited, unchanged, patient, and endlessly capable, because it had devoured before, and it would again.
Warnings only work on people who believe they apply to them. That is the swamp's greatest advantage. It does not rely on secrecy. The signs are there, posted at trailheads, printed on ranger pamphlets, whispered in local bars. But every year, new campers arrive convinced that preparation makes them immune. That experience turns danger into inconvenience. The swamp waits for those people. 3 months after the original disappearance, a new group entered the same region. 4 men, late 20s, weekend adventurers. They told friends they wanted real wilderness. No crowds, no paved trails. They packed light but confident. Hammocks instead of tents, satellite phones, machetes for undergrowth. They laughed at the humidity. They joked about gators. They had read just enough to believe they understood the risk. They did not. Their first mistake was distance. They traveled deeper than planned, chasing what looked like firmer ground on satellite imagery. The swamp lied to the camera. Floating vegetation mimicked land from above, forming islands that shifted subtly with rainfall and temperature. What looked solid in planning became uncertain underfoot. By late afternoon, their pace slowed. The heat became unbearable, not just hot, but suffocating. Sweat soaked clothes instantly, salt stinging eyes, muscles cramping despite constant hydration. Insects descended in waves, relentless, biting through fabric, crawling into ears and mouths. Conversation dwindled, frustration set in. The second mistake was stopping too soon. They chose a clearing that felt right, a patch of slightly raised ground beneath a stand of cypress trees. The surface resisted their boots. It didn't wobble, it didn't sag. They congratulated themselves. Hammocks went up. A small fire crackled to life. Dinner was eaten quickly, silence settling over them like a blanket. The swamp was quiet that night. No frogs, no birds. Even insects retreated as darkness deepened. The silence was so complete it rang in their ears. One of the men commented on it uneasily. Another shrugged it off. Silence, after all, feels like peace, until it isn't. Sometime after midnight, the ground shifted. Not violently, not dramatically, subtly. The floating mat beneath them adjusted to redistributed weight. One hammock dipped lower than before. Another rope slackened. No one woke. The swamp had learned patience. By dawn, the clearing had changed. The fire pit sat closer to the water's edge. Tree roots once dry now glistened wetly. Their footprints from the night before had softened, edges blurred as if time itself had pressed a palm down on them. The men noticed. Unease crept in. They debated leaving early. One suggested relocating to higher ground. Another argued they were already behind schedule. They compromised. Pack up after breakfast, move slowly. The third mistake was standing together. When one man stepped forward to test the ground, his boot sank past the ankle instantly. He laughed, embarrassed, shifting his weight back. The ground didn't release him. It tightened. Not suction, resistance. The swamp firmed around his leg like muscle flexing. The others rushed to help. The clearing collapsed. What they had camped on wasn't land. It was a floating mat of peat and roots, anchored loosely to nothing solid. Their combined movement overloaded it. The surface tore open silently, water spilling upward as the mat folded inward. One man fell waist-deep immediately. Another went down to the chest. The third dropped flat, scrambling backward, fingers clawing uselessly at wet vegetation that shredded under pressure. The fourth ran. He made it 10 steps before his foot punched through into cold, black water. He screamed as the mud swallowed his calf, then his knee. The sensation wasn't sinking, it was being taken. Pressure wrapped unevenly, pulling sideways, downward, inward. The others screamed too. Not for long. The swamp muffles sound efficiently. Thick water absorbs vibration. Vegetation breaks waves of noise. Screams became wet gasps, then nothing at all. The ground smoothed itself as the mat resettled, water closing over the disturbance. Within minutes, there was no sign they had been there. No thrashing, no floating packs, no bubbles. The swamp does not dramatize. The runner survived because fear sharpened instinct. He cut loose his boot with a knife, skin tearing as he wrenched free. He crawled, belly flat, distributing weight instinctually, dragging himself away inch by inch until firmer ground accepted him. He didn't stop moving until his muscles failed. Search teams would later find his boot. It stood upright in shallow water, filled with mud, laces still tied. By the time rescuers arrived days later, rain had erased the clearing completely. There was no collapse site, no broken mat, no evidence. The satellite phone signal pinged briefly, then vanished. GPS logs ended abruptly mid-step. Officials labeled it another disappearance. Locals shook their heads. The survivor was quieter than the first. Older eyes, less denial. He spoke only once about what happened. He said, "The ground waited until we trusted it, then it rearranged us." The swamp did not need hunger, it needed opportunity. And every time someone believed they could outthink it, outlast it, dominate it, the swamp accepted the offering without resistance. Because it had time. It always has time. There is a reason the swamp never feels finished with you. Even after you leave it behind, even after the road returns beneath your tires and civilization wraps itself around you again, the memory lingers like dampness in your lungs. The swamp doesn't chase, it doesn't stalk, it allows people to come to it willingly, and that is why it never runs out of victims. After the fourth disappearance, something changed, not in the swamp, but in the people watching it. Rangers stopped pretending this was coincidence. Patterns emerged where none should exist. Disappearances clustered around the same terrain features, the same false rises, the same deceptive stretches of ground that appeared firm, welcoming, safe. The swamp wasn't random. It was selective. A geologist was brought in quietly under the pretense of mapping erosion risks. What he found unsettled even seasoned professionals. The region sat atop centuries of accumulated organic decay, peat, roots, collapsed vegetation mats layered like skin. Gas pockets formed beneath the surface, shifting constantly. Water levels rose and fell unpredictably, loosening anchors, redistributing weight. But the most disturbing discovery wasn't geological, it was behavioral. Trail cameras placed discreetly around the area captured something no one expected. Not animals, not movement in the night, but changes. Land that appeared stable one day softened the next. Vegetation rearranged subtly after heavy footsteps passed through. Clearings that didn't exist formed gradually, then vanished. The swamp responded to pressure. Not consciously, not maliciously, but efficiently. It was a system that adjusted to intrusion, redistributing weakness where weight accumulated. The more people trusted it, the more it betrayed them. The swamp didn't need intelligence. It followed physics, chemistry, time, and time was its greatest ally. Officials debated closing the area entirely, fencing it off, declaring it restricted land. But Florida is large, and swamps are everywhere. You cannot fence nature. You can only warn people, and warnings, as history proved, are rarely enough. So they changed tactics. They erased it. Maps were updated quietly, trails removed. Online hiking forums flagged the region as unremarkable. No legends, no dramatic stories, just another patch of difficult terrain not worth visiting. Rangers redirected traffic subtly, never mentioning danger outright. The swamp became boring. And for a while it worked. Months passed without incident, then a year, then two, until one summer a family ignored a faded sign and pulled off the road, curious about a stretch of quiet wilderness no one talked about anymore. Parents, 2 teenagers, a short hike, a picnic, nothing extreme, nothing reckless. They never made it back to the car. Search teams found the picnic basket floating near the edge of shallow water, sandwiches intact, drinks unopened. A camera recovered later contained photos taken minutes before disappearance, smiling faces, cypress trees behind them, ground that looked solid beneath their feet. The last photo was blurred, not because of motion, because the ground had begun to sink. Recovery efforts lasted weeks. Nothing surfaced, nothing was recovered. The swamp had accepted them with the same quiet efficiency it always did. At the debrief, a ranger said something no one disagreed with. "It's not that the swamp kills people," he said. "It's that people insist on standing where they shouldn't." That truth settled heavily. The Florida swamp does not behave like an enemy. Enemies announce danger. The swamp behaves like a mistake waiting to happen, a slow calculation of weight, time, and pressure that ends only one way. Those who survive understand this too late. Every survivor interviewed spoke of the same realization, the moment they felt the ground change beneath them. Not panic first, confusion, betrayal, the horror of realizing the land itself had never agreed to hold them. One survivor described it best. "It wasn't pulling me down," he said. "It was letting me go." That is the swamp's true nature. It does not trap, it releases support. And once that support is gone, there is nothing beneath you but layers of decay that do not forgive mistakes. Today, the area still exists, unmarked, unfenced, quiet. Tourists pass within miles of it without knowing. Locals avert their eyes when driving nearby. Fishermen refuse to anchor too close. Hunters circle wide. At night, the swamp breathes. Water shifts gently. Gas escapes in soft pops. The surface rearranges itself endlessly, preparing for weight it may or may not receive. Somewhere beneath that black water are traces of everyone it has taken. Not bodies, not bones, but redistributed matter. Memories dissolved into roots, names absorbed into mud. The swamp remembers without remembering, and that is why it remains dangerous. Because there will always be someone who believes they are prepared enough, careful enough, light enough, smart enough, and the swamp will let them believe that, until the moment it doesn't. If you ever find yourself standing at the edge of a Florida swamp that feels quiet, too quiet, pay attention. If the ground feels soft but forgiving, welcoming but uncertain, listen to that instinct that tells you something is wrong. Because once the swamp decides you weigh too much, it never gives you back.